I don't like popular things. I'm built different. That's how some of you sound. A24 is one of the most beloved production companies with films such as X, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, and Uncut Gems in their catalog. A24 has developed a loyal, extensive fan base amassing over 1 million followers on Instagram. But why? Let's take it back to the beginning. A24 is an independent production and distribution company that was founded in 2012 in New York by David Finkel, David Katz, and John Hodges. Now, I actually didn't know this, but the reason the company is named A24 is because when the idea was thought of, they were driving on the A24 motorway, hence the name. So A24 is a distributor, and as I said, it first began distributing movies such as The Mind of Charles Swan III, The Bling Ring, Spring Breakers, Ginger and Rosa, and a lot of coming-of-age movies particularly. It had a pattern of primarily distributing coming-of-age films and then also with like a touch of crime. All of this changed though for A24 in 2014 when Enemy starring Jake Gyllenhaal premiered, as this was the first time that they were putting out a movie that was a psychological thriller. And it deviated from the coming-of-age crime pattern. Maybe a little bit. Like Enemy, I guess, like when thinking about it, you could probably consider it crime, but it's more a psychological thriller. I made a spreadsheet in order to figure out A24's pattern for their production and distribution and what marks the difference. I believe A24 was primarily doing coming of age films, and then as the company began to grow, they started branching out into doing like things like horror, and they had already started out a little bit of crime but moved on to the psychological thriller, the drama, the romance, etc. In 2015, A24 began wanting to work in television, and so they started developing Channing Tatum's Comrade Detective. They also started getting deals in with Amazon Prime and DirecTV, and they were still distributing movies at this time. In 2016, Barry Jenkins' groundbreaking film Moonlight was released. This coming-of-age drama won several Academy Awards and had a very significant impact on the industry at the time of the company's projected growth rate. Joy McMillan became one of the first Black women to get nominated for an Oscar for editing, and Mahershala Ali became one of the first Muslim actors to win an award. This film made a lot of waves in terms of inclusivity. The story follows a Black man's life and featured a predominantly Black cast as he comes to terms with the LGBTQ+ identity. Ultimately, an amazing film, which I think put A24 on people's radar. This was the first film that A24 actually paid for and produced, and there was a significant upturn in movies that they produced starting in 2022. In 2016, A24 started a podcast called the A24 Podcast, very original. Now, this featured guest stars such as Sofia Coppola and Bo Burnham, and I guess I found this list pretty thought-provoking because these aren't people I think of when I think of A24 necessarily. I mean, A24 had been working with Sofia Coppola in The Bling Ring, but I never knew A24 worked with Bo Burnham. In 2018, A24 ended up producing and distributing Bo Burnham's film 8th Grade, and then they didn't really work with him again because the next thing he produced was Inside, which is available on Netflix, and he made, I assume, independent. I don't know if he made it independently and then pitched it to Netflix or how that worked, but the door's still open for future collaborations with him at A24 as far as I know. In Sofia Coppola's case, I was a little confused why A24 distributes her films, like Priscilla and The Bling Ring, but they don't produce them. Then I eventually, figured out, she has enough money to produce them herself, which is why. The only films that she didn't have to produce herself was New York Stories, The Virgin Suicides, and the short film New York City Ballet. So the pattern I was talking about, I think A24 has a list of directors that are basically greenlit for them. What it looks like is they have a pattern of distributing movies, and then if that movie ends up succeeding, they will produce the next films for that person, and then they just kind of keep producing those people's films. Some examples of this would include Alex Garland, Robert Eggers, Celine Song, Rose Glass, and Ari Aster. In 2018, John Hodges announced his departure from the company. A24 entered lots of distribution deals, one with Showtime and one with Apple TV. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know everything about distribution because I certainly don't, but I will tell you the important bits. In 2022, A24 launched their membership service, AA24, and for $5 a month, you get access to a close friend story, merch, and early access to things, I think. Now, I don't personally subscribe to this service, but I've seen some of the merch available, such as screenplay books and the Midsummer Incense Burner. I love that. I'm jealous. In 2023, A24 mentioned that they would be helping with their first animated musical, Hazbin Hotel, which would come out sometime in early 2024. Now, I actually remember waiting for Hazbin Hotel, back when I saw the pilot, and I was like, oh my god, A24! So Hazbin Hotel is an animated musical series that was produced by Vivzy Pop, and the pilot was on YouTube. A24 picked it up and created it into a series. Vivzy Pop was also responsible for creating the series Hell of a Boss. I feel like we literally waited forever for news about it. I remember people were like, is this even still in the works? So now that we're all caught up on A24's lore, I think we can finally talk about what makes it so special. So A24 is primarily known for producing art house films. They also take a lot of risks that other production companies won't make. For example, they actually produced Ari Aster's first movie, right out of film school, Hereditary, which my favorite, my beloved. Love you, Hereditary. We've also talked about that in my feminist course, and I love Toni Collette. She's amazing. And they had produced this movie when he only had a short Munchausen under his belt. There's inhuman attention to detail within the film, along with disturbing imagery that very few films at the time incorporated. Doing that definitely added to the uncomfortableness and the scary. Hereditary was a lot different from some of the other films that were coming out at the time, such as Bird Box, The Strangers, Pray at Night, and Truth or Dare. Arguably, the only other films that could really rival Hereditary at the time was either Get Out or Possum. In a curated list of the top 10 films of the year, box office-wise, Hereditary ended up being in the top 10, beating out movies such as Get Out and Suspiria. Hereditary was also special because through and through it's a family drama, and so that later seems like it just become a theme, at least in Astor's movies. Nobody loves examining the human psyche as much as Ari Aster does, and in 2019, his sophomore film, Midsummer, ended up coming out, which is also a family drama horror. I think that this really cemented Ari Aster and Pavel Pogorzelski, his cinematographer, as like a duo. They didn't work on Eddington together, which I couldn't believe, I assume because one of them was busy, but like most of their films, like Beau Was Afraid, they worked together. And so Eddington was the first film that Ari Aster's made that he wasn't working with Pavel Pogorzelski, and I remember being like heartbroken, like, they broke up my duo. I think that Ari Aster really put A24 in like the horror genre. Like people really liked Hereditary, so then they went to go see Midsummer because they liked Hereditary, and they're like, oh, he did a good job on that, I want to see what else he does. Intrinsically, people yearn for uniqueness, freedom of self-expression, and individualism. That autonomy gives us, the audience, a heightened self-esteem. And in cases of when we go see A24 movies, we're expecting something a little bit different each time. It's not like mainstream stuff that you see all the time. I mean, there is definitely a template when you go and you look at like specifically Hollywood things, like TV shows, they're very formulaic, and like sitcoms and stuff like that, they are very formulaic, and you compare that to certain movies that are getting produced now, and you're kind of like, oh, yeah, that's different. I believe this makes us feel good about the movies that we're watching because it makes us feel like we have a little bit of a secret to gatekeep. We have something that's kind of special and individual and unique. Now, I'm not religious, but let's get spiritual. Humans crave their individuality for two reasons, one being spiritual and one being biological. The first being biological is that humans look for ways to survive however they can, and in our case, as fully developed people, we are looking for things like poetry, art, literature, trying to survive the horrors. The spiritual reason is that all of our souls yearn to be like the creator, and so we each want to put our own little personal touch on everything, just like he did. So like in our case, we hopefully want to impact the world positively. DPR Ian's a musician whom I love that has a quote actually about this in his Identity film about bipolar disorder, but it applies to humanity, I think, as well. When it says, "Where did I go wrong with you? Out of all my creations, you were the epitome of all that is good, the utmost of my potential. You were my first, and I'll make sure to be your last. You created me in your image, and now it's time to create mine and yours." In theory, we were created in the creator's image, and now it's time for us to leave our mark on the world. I will link his Mito film down below. It's so good. I want to study his brain under a microscope. Independent media is really starting to take off these days, and it feels like everyone's put onto A24. I think it has something similar to do with like on YouTube, if they're like, if you post consistently and in a wide enough range, then you will end up getting views. I think it's the same for like A24 and their films release. They kind of have a little bit of something for everybody, whether that be family drama, horror, romance, for fun, weird as fuck, stuff like that. They also use a very simple marketing strategy that reminds me very much of Brandy Melville. Like, the girls that get it, if you know, you know. A24 typically doesn't push a bunch of trailers in your face, I've noticed, unless it's Talk to Me. I saw the most trailers in the world for Talk to Me, like, ever, when it came out. It was, like, the scariest movie. I consider that the scariest movie I've ever seen. It was so disturbing. I thought about it for so long after. Also, the montage scene is one of, like, the best scenes in, like, cinema, I think. I remember when Jesse Eisenberg had his directorial debut and he released When You Finish Saving the World, starring like Finn Wolfhard, and I remember like there was no time in between like when the trailer was out versus when it was in theaters. It's crazy when I see Finn Wolfhard in other things because I think of him as just the kid from Stranger Things. Like something that I thought was a coincidence that I found later was I was watching, there's a band I like called Pup, and I was watching a music video for Guilt Trip, and then Finn Wolfhard, when he was like 10 years old, was in that, and I'm like, oh my god! No, but A24's cliquish nature of like the girls that get it, seems to primarily be popular in a lot of Gen Z and millennial spaces. I'm not gonna lie, as a film student, I've definitely seen people who base their self-worth on their taste. And the film connoisseur types that are actually, it's like this. I'm gonna be honest, I like bad movies. I love Cocaine Bear. I love The Black Phone. Tucker and Dale versus Evil, I highly recommend, one of my all-time favorites. A24 also releases movies that are like within a niche or kind of similar to each other, so you're like, oh, I like that one. It's kind of like after I finish a really good TV show, I'm like, TV shows like XYZ. And when talking about bad movies, I also want to say bad stories are what makes good fan fiction. Because like after I read like Breaking Bad, for example, I'm like, I'm not interested in reading fanfic. I know how the story ends. But if I'm watching like Voltron, for example, I'm like, yeah, give me the fanfic. Like, because of the consistency, I also think that something like A24, it's easy to gain like a cult following, kind of like how Hybe, the K-pop company, is. Like, if you like one of the bands, you probably like several. Independent films cannot exist without films created by large studios, because you can't have independent stuff that differ from the mainstream if you don't have mainstream that sets it up in the first place. A24 isn't the only distribution company, though, that's killing it. The company Neon, which was founded in 2017 in New York, is one of the companies I believe could rival A24 in the future, and maybe already started to. All the components are there for success. It has a steadfast audience, it has consistently good releases, it's still a bit underground, so it has that exclusivity by default. Some of its competitive catalog includes Parasite, The Portrait of a Lady on Fire, Moonage Daydream, Longlegs, and I, Tonya. Not everybody is looking for eccentric, though. While Pearl might be elusive and inaccessible for some audiences, some movies like Captain Marvel are people's bread and butter. Now, with the talk of indie films, it's very popular to talk about people's interests. Some people love to love things, and some people love to hate things. And I think that introduces a conversation. Honestly, it reminds me of Saltburn and how the audience was split. I remember there's half the people that were like, oh my god, this movie is so weird, like, don't watch it. And then there's the other half that's like, I love this movie, it was phenomenal. There's the ones that are like, oh my god, I'm traumatized from this movie. And then there's the other kind that's like, it's not that deep, chill, and make that their whole personality. It's a little bit pick-me-ish, if we're being honest. A lot of people form their opinions based off what other people say, and based off of their taste, because they're not authentic and can form their own opinions. They're too scared of scrutiny. So they just go with what the masses say. Like, Saltburn's really good. Saltburn is traumatizing. Saltburn was really weird. Some people would rather hold parts of themselves back and not be authentic than committing to the bit, basically. Some sisterly advice from me is to embrace the cringe, because then you'll be so much happier. Embrace the cocaine bear, guys. Art's created for us to think, and where's a better place to do that than a community of like-minded individuals who can maybe engage in the same stuff that we like. And in A24's case, they have an app for that. And these communities are going to feel a little protective in a sense, like what they have is special, which only heightens the loyalty to a brand or company and broadens their influence. My name is Rachel Liggett, and thank you for watching.